Now, I want to talk about the Trump of it all, because it feels to me that there would be certain people in certain sections of the Labor Party who, if they hold on to government, majority or minority, will say, we always had it in hand, guys. 4D chess. We always knew that if Trump would get up, then we would do this and we would do that. Because I think that the Trump of it all is going to be a big shadow and an echo over this election. And just like national security has worked for previous governments at previous times, I think a multiple week conversation about insert thing that they may or may not put a tariff on, even if you haven't heard a word from the White House about it. And we've had 2 of these now in a week about PBS and also about social media and big tech. The White House hasn't said a word. But you get 6 p.m. news coverage for an imagined threat that the White House has not talked about. That's exactly where Anthony Albanese wants to be, isn't it though, Darren? Where he wants to be standing up for Australia and pushing back against a leader that I like, that most of our audience is all in on, but the reality is in polling, 60% of Australians don't like what he's doing.
Well, certainly, if you look at the Canadian government, they were cruising to an absolute shellacking, and they're now back in front.
Yes.
And I realise they share a long border with Trump, but that narrative that you described, you can roll that out a couple of times a week through the campaign, and then you let Peter Dutton run the argument of, are you Timu Trump or not? And that's unfair, but politics isn't fair.
No.
So if that's the story that gets resonance, and it probably will, he will be stuck defending when the government will be putting little fires out that need to be put out by somebody.
Well, and so, Christy, to that point, right, obviously, I mean, Peter Dutton's made it very clear, long-form interviews, press conferences, all the rest, I ain't Trump, I ain't Trump. But that is going to have, and mark my words here, that's going to have a thing on the right of Australia, right? I'm not going to say the far right because that's where we start to get into extremism, but there are people who are all in on Trump who are going to say, well, if he's not Trumpy enough, then I'm not for him. And then you end up at a scenario where who knows where preferences go. And remember, 9% is currently the polling number for One Nation. 9%. So traditionally 50-50 when it comes to preferences. 2019 it was basically 75% of preferences that went to the Libs. If you've got 75% of 9% that's out there, that's what makes them competitive. So any free advice to the Libs about how to deal with the Trump trap?
I think Dutton, and I've said it previously on the network, that I don't think he's put a foot wrong. Labor knows he hasn't put a foot wrong in falling into that trap. They are trying to bait him. The Greens are trying to bait him as well. However, they are stepping up their attacks. The PBS confection argument, as you have pointed out, gives Labor an opportunity to put the words Trump and Medicare and Peter Dutton all in the same sentence.
Correct.
That's exactly where Labor wants to be. That is them escalating their bait. And so I think Peter Dutton's been very deft. I think he has played a very, very fine line. But at the same time, look, there's no doubt that the coalition knows and that 9% One Nation. And actually, Paul, on some polls, One Nation is tracking at 13%.
Correct.
Particularly in states that you wouldn't expect, states like South Australia. This is not an isolated Queensland, poll tracking for One Nation. Palmer also achieved 5% at the last election in Queensland, somewhat less in other states, but that is part of that. Those people who vote for that Trump-like narrative, particularly more so Palmer, I think, than One Nation, but there's certainly grabbing votes from the coalition, and it's going to be really, really tough. I think this election is a preference lottery, as you have so rightly described.